The Gex series is fascinating to me, more so in its background rather than the actual games themselves. And I do want to emphasize that this is not a bad series. It is a series with incredible potential, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of Bubsy the Bobcat, just a little bit. Uh, Bubsy had 1 and 2, the first 2 installments, be a 2D platformer, more so in the veins of like a Sonic game. And the third entry was their attempt at making a 3D platformer, which really didn't work properly. And I wouldn't say that it is necessarily their fault for it not working properly. But usually, back then, your development cycle would be like less than a year. So they probably didn't have too much time to figure out Bubsy. And maybe if we had a Bubsy 4 or Bubsy 5, maybe it would have been a better game. You could argue that we could have just done away with Bubsy 5, 4, and 3 and just had a 3-year development cycle, fixing and polishing, but that apparently wasn't how they did it back then. Gex is one of those interesting ones where the first one was a 2D platformer, but the Gex 2 and Gex 3 were 3D platformers. The first one was released, I believe, in 95 for another platform, not for the PlayStation 1. All 3 of these are on PlayStation 1, and that's where I played them. But the first one was on something else. I can't remember what it first released on, but it eventually made its way onto the PlayStation 1. And then a couple years later, we had Gex 2 and then Gex 3. Gex 2 was released during the age of the 3D platformer. The age when Croc, Crash, and Spyro were coming out. Oh, Croc and Crash. Crash was definitely out by now. Spyro wouldn't come out until like 98, 99. Spyro would be the definitive 3D platformer to me. It was my 3D platformer. It was my favorite 3D platformer of the PlayStation 1 era. It was so good. So good. I'll probably have to make a video dedicated just to Spyro at some point, but Gex 2 and 3 were trying to cash in on that. They were trying to make that a mascot for this system, for this era. And they, as in Crystal Dynamics, before Eidos came into the picture. During the 90s, Crystal Dynamics was they were making hits and misses left and right. They were a mess. It wouldn't be until after the merger with Eidos that they would truly find their shine in the PS2 Tomb Raider games, like Tomb Raider Legends, I believe Anniversary, and eventually Underworld. I think that was also Crystal Dynamics mostly. They left them in charge of the Tomb Raider games on the PlayStation 2 era, and they were really fun. They really did. I played the Tomb Raider games, and they were very good. So when I found out that Crystal Dynamics was the one working on Gex, and then I played Gex 2, Gex 3, I could see potential without polish, if that makes sense. Potential without polish. And I've been making this complaints for a lot of PlayStation 1 games, but once again, with Gex 2 being a 3D game, you need the analog stick. You need the analog stick for proper movement. Alright? So, why does Gex 2 not have it? Why does Gex 2 not have analog support? You have to use the D-pad to move Gex in a fixed 8 cardinal directions. 8 directions. North, northwest, northeast, north, south, east, west, east, and south, east, southwest, yada, yada, yada. you're forced to use just 8 directions, and you can't do circle or and the camera was pretty bad as well. Now, the first one they did pretty good. The first one is genuinely a really decent 2D platformer, but this is coming out in an era where the 2D platformer was everywhere. Everywhere. You had Bubsy 1 and 2, you had Earthworm Jim, you had Mario, who's been doing it for about a decade now. You got Sonic, everybody was out there with the 2D platformers. 2D's this, 2D's Metroid, Castlevania, Metroidvania, Castleloid, whatever. Everybody was doing it. You know? So it's very hard to miss with the 2D platformer back then, because it was pretty much a solidified thing. Now, me personally, I don't care too much for the 2D platformer. Oh no, somebody put a bunch of swords in his face like that Tangled movie. Ooh, yes, it's just my opinion. Why not? I don't care for 2D platformers. I don't care for them. I've played them. I played Sonic on the Game Gear all the time as a kid. I did. I played it in the car rides all the time when I was a kid. I liked Sonic. But it's just this 2D aesthetic. It's where you're fixed, wanting towards the screen, blah, blah, blah. When it's not a beat-em-up in the vein of, like, Comic Zone or the TMNT games, if it's not one of those types of games, I generally don't care for them. I just generally don't care for them. Especially when they're kind of like open 2D platformers. Like Gex 1 was. You have to explore a 2D space going forwards, going backwards, up, down, left, right, up, down, yada yada, to find remotes for collectibles and all that other stuff. It was hard enough getting to the end, but you gotta find a remote. and it was generally just not a thing that I really cared for. It's just a personal thing. It's not that the game is bad. I'm trying to say this right now. It's not that the game is bad. The game is actually really good. It's really well polished. All the controls work great. If I were to make a complaint, I would say that Gex kind of feels slippery. When he's walking, he kind of feels slippery. When he's walking forwards, backwards, whatever. He feels slippery on the platforms, and he may slip off a platform to fall somewhere else, and you didn't intend that to happen, but hey, he's got slippery feet yet. But the thing that really grinded my gears was... Now, when you play a 2D platformer and you go through the level about halfway through, you might find something called a checkpoint. The checkpoint is there to check your point in the game, in the level. Which means if you die after activating this checkpoint, you will respawn. If you have lives left, you will respawn at that checkpoint. You won't respawn at the start of the level, you won't be booted out of the level, you will respawn at that checkpoint. Right? So, in some levels in the Gex 1 game, there are what I call pitfalls. They could be little puddles of water, they could be just endless falling off of something. When you fall off a platform and you endlessly keep falling or something, that obviously kills you and takes away one of your lives, you would think that you just respawn at that checkpoint. You would just respawn at that checkpoint, right? You go right to the checkpoint. No! That's not what happens in Gex 1. No, sir. No, sir. No. When you fall into a pitfall, you get booted out of the level. It just yeets you out. And that kind of pissed me off. It did. A little bit. You know, there was a level I was playing, and I had just gotten that checkpoint. You know, I just got it. And right next to it was one of those pitfalls, a little puddle of water. And I slipped off the platform into that puddle of water. And I'm like, oh, well, I got some lime stuff, so I'll fix that level. I'll fix that jump. But lo and behold, to my building ire, I was booted out of the level entirely. And it kind of, maybe a little ire. Maybe a little bit ire. Maybe I was a little bit enraged at that. So I tried it again. But since it was a pretty big level, when I finally got back to that checkpoint, I kind of forgot how the jump looked, and I fell off of it again into that puddle of water, and I was booted back out again, back out of the level. Then I had to do all of what I already did again. It's like, why have a checkpoint, right? Why have a checkpoint, right? It's like, oh, the checkpoint's only there if you get killed by an enemy. I never did! It was always those pitfalls that got me. It wasn't an enemy. I never got hit by an enemy. It was the pitfalls. Falling off a platform, falling off, and being booted out of the level and having to do it again. Maybe a little bit angry, maybe a little bit angry, but I pushed through. I finished level after level after level, and it was a pretty good setup. Gex won. Outside of that little pitfall problem, it was a pretty decent game. It was a pretty decent 2D platformer, and somebody who likes 2D platformers might actually like this game. I can really appreciate the game. I really could. I like how Gex makes a lot of film references and movie references and riffs depending upon the area he's in. If you're in like the horror level, Gex will make horror movie references and riffs left and right. And if you like that, you'll get a chuckle out of it for the first few times he does it. By the 50th to 60th time he does it, because you keep falling off a platform into a pitfall, by the 50th to 60th time he keeps saying the exact same lines, it loses its charm a little bit, and loses its charm. And of course we have to bring up the fact that it's always tail time. It's tail time. You know, all three games, it's tail time. You jump into a game, you jump into a level, it's tail time. So that's Gex 1. It's probably the most polished of the three Gex games. It really is. And that's probably because the 2D platformer is the most polished of the platformers by 95. They've been doing it since the 80s. I think they've figured it out. The 3D platformer, though, was a new thing. It was that new thing. By the time of the PlayStation 1 came out, that 3D space was suddenly a possible thing that you could actually make games for. And so, after the first 3D platformer was released, everyone else was trying to do it. Crash comes out, and it was incredible how they were able to make that thing run on their limited hardware back in the day. There's a video of the behind the scenes on how they were able to get Crash to work so well for that time of year, for that budget, for that constraint and all that stuff. How they had everything behind Crash just suddenly disappear. The only things that exist that are rendered are what's in front of you, and it was actually really impressive to me to see how that looked. Crash, while I don't really appreciate the time, I'm not a time trial person, but I did play the Crash games. I didn't do the time trials because I'm not a masochist. I despise being timed to do anything. I don't like timers. I don't like them. I just don't like them. But if you like them, that's fine. I'm not insulting you at all. If you like timers and time trials, if you want to get through it in 10 seconds, then you do it. I'm not. Gex 2 comes out, and it is in the 3D space. In a time when the 3D space has been around for a few years. In a time where the analog stick has been out for about a year now. And since the game started development, to my knowledge, after the analog stick had already come out, they could have easily made Gex 2 compatible with the analog stick. They really could have. They really could have made Gex 2 compatible with the analog stick. You know, you bring out your little controller. You got your two little analog sticks here. One of them could control the camera, except it doesn't. and the other one could control the Gex's movement, except it doesn't. So you have to use the D-pad and the L1, R1 buttons to change your camera. And of course, they invert the controls, because obviously they do. Now, after all, who wants to press right and look right? You know, that's stupid. We need to look left when we press right. So when we press right, Gex looks this way. If we want to press left, Gex will look right. It's just simple illogic. And obviously there's no way to change this. Clearly, no, there's no way to change that. No. And you're stuck using the D-pad. Yes. Oh, Gex 2 was a trial and a half to play through. Mainly because it looks good. It looks fantastic. And I would have really loved to have played this with proper camera control and proper analog stick support. It could have happened. They could have really genuinely have done this, because it was capable at the time. Controls were doing it in some other games. Because it's just that this game didn't do it. It's just that this one didn't do it. You see, let's pull out a controller. Here's one. This is one of my old PS2 controllers. The see-through was pretty big at the time. Everything had to be see-through. The Game Boy Color had to be see-through. Everything had to be. The iMac was see-through. It was all see-through at the time. And of course, the rubbers have been chewed off or whatever. They're gone. Bye-bye. Anyways, so we have here things called analog sticks. Now, in the PS1 era, these were first introduced. The first few years of the PS1 era, we didn't have analog sticks. We had PS1 controllers without these. So, a lot of PS1 games, early titles, do not have analog support. The analog came out in 97-ish. So basically, we could basically safely assume anything from 98 onwards were released after the DualShock controller. The analog sticks had come out, right? Gex 2, to my knowledge, released in January of 1998. Now, this is a on-the-wire type of thing. Probably, if I'm gonna be fair, the DualShock controller probably released in mid-97, mid to late 97, and they were already in the development cycle using the non-analog stick version of the controller for Gex 2, and that's probably why they didn't involve analog support, because it's January of 98. Obviously, we have to be kind to these things. We have to be understanding that Gex 2, though it was a game that probably would have been a lot more easily controlled with an analog stick, was released without analog support, probably because the development cycle began before analog support happened. We have to assume that that's the case. Now, clearly, some developers may have started working on a game in 97, then the DualShock comes out, and they decide, you know what? Let's launch this game with the new DualShock support. Let's delay the game by a few months and add these little babies here. Let's add these little babies in here. Some games did that. Some 98 games that released in 98 did that. And they let you use these fancy little nubbles here to let you play the game that way. And it was fun. We loved it. Gex 2, however, they decided, let's not do that. But is Gex 2 a bad game outside of not having analog support. No, it's actually pretty fun. The only thing I would say that is kind of limiting is that it follows the Gex 1 formula a little bit too much. It's a 3D game, but it's using that 2D type of thing. You know how in Gex 1 we have the horror map. You go into a horror themed area, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little gates that Gex can walk through to do a map in the horror aesthetic. That's kind of what Gex 2 did. You have about 4 or 5 levels that you can go into that use the same map. It uses the same aesthetic. It uses the same horror theme, which means Gex's horror movie trivia quotes are going to... he's going to repeat them because you're going through the same levels, the same film map. He's going to make the same horror movie references. Some of them are pretty funny. He in one of the horror levels, it's probably going to be one of your first levels you enter, he's going to say something like, "Axe to the chest for Scatman Carruthers." He's making a Shining reference, and that's pretty funny. It was pretty funny. I appreciate all that because I've seen most of the films that this guy's making references to, and I thought that was pretty funny. But, when you go through a level once, you kind of finished with it. You're kind of finished with it. But you gotta do it again. You gotta go back in. Because every level has 3 to 4 remotes. These are like collectibles that you can collect. And 3 of them are locked behind tasks that you have to do. Like maybe finish the level, get to the end of the level, or do 5 things, like hit 5 barrels in the level or something, blow up 3 jukeboxes or something, and then you will activate the remote and you can go collect it. But every single remote, every single one that you collect will take you out of that level. So you have to go back in to get the other one, and then you have to go back in again to get the third one, which means you're going to be redoing the level 3 times at the very least to collect these remotes. So if there are 5 horror-themed levels, you're going to be going to that horror-theme aesthetic map 15 times to get to those remotes. It's a good try. It really was. It's a really good try. I don't want to knock it for that, but... and some of these jumps, some of these maps, some of these things really could have used that analog support. I really wish they could have delayed the release of Gex 2 to like maybe April of '98 to add the DualShock support. That might have really helped it in my eyes. It really would have. It would have helped me personally. I just don't really like using the D-pad for 3D spaces, to be honest with you. If for 2D spaces, the D-pad's fine. It's really fine. You go up, down, left, right, that's fine. But when you have a 3D space, you need that analog or joystick. You need something like that. It's just my personal opinion. It's not something that's making the game worse. Okay, it's just a personal opinion. When we enter into Gex 3, we enter into the best of this space. The best of the Gex games. It is certainly the best 3D Gex game, because 2D, if the 2D Gex 2, if Gex 2, not 2D, but Gex 2 3D, is their prototype for the 3D space, then Gex 3 was where they looked at everything that went wrong in Gex 2 and tried to fix it a little bit. However, there are still a few hiccups. There's still a few problems with it. Mainly the camera. The camera is still messed up and still backwards down. Backwards down. Mirror dimension nightmare. Left is right, right is left, up is down, and down is up. It's disorienting, to say the least. Even though you think you've memorized the topsy-turvy backwards town of the camera where you're pressing right to look left, you're still somewhere, some part of your brain, when you're in the moment, you're in that moment, when maybe you pick up a buff or a power-up for Gex, and you have 15 seconds to get to another section of the level to use that power-up to open a path to continue the level, and the camera's looking the other direction, and you need the camera to turn to look to where you need to make a jump, and you collect this power-up, and you're pressing right, expecting the camera to pan right, but it's panning left, and it's throwing you off. So you have to wait 10 more seconds for the power-up to run out. Change the camera by holding the left button to look right. Then your pointing the way you want. Your camera's pointing the way you want it to point. You go collect the power-up, and then you go, and it slows you down a little bit. It does. Now, the camera does kind of have a sort of active mode, where if the camera will eventually try to change its position to face the way Gex is looking, but it doesn't do it fast enough, especially when you are in time. There's so many timed things in Gex 3, so many timed things. It's to give you a sense of being rushed to run through a platformer obstacle course without having time to run through it safely. It wants to make you rush through these jumps instead of lining them up properly, because while you may have been able to safely do it without any problems in maybe 45 seconds, now you have to collect this power-up to open something on the other side of this platformer obstacle course in 20 seconds. So you have to shave off 25 seconds to jump across this thing safely. So you're going to be doing a lot of things repetitively. And I don't want to say that that's a bad thing, obviously, because that's what Spyro did quite a bit too. You collected a power-up, like, say, a supercharged power-up, or the fireball breath power-up, or the infinite flight power-up, and you had to go make it to a different part of the map to use this power-up to open an obstacle or collect a collectible to get some stuff. So it's the same type of idea. It's the same type of aesthetic. The camera just needs to be a bit better. The camera needs to pan faster. It needs to look faster. I need settings to change the inverted backwards camera to the proper, more rational camera, where right means right, and left means left, up means up, and down means down, where I hold down the triangle button to use Gex's first-person point of view so he can so you can get a good look at where things are. When you press up, he looks down. Normally, when I press up, I want him to look up. When I press down, I want him to look down. So I would have really liked settings, where you go into your options menu, and you go into the camera controls, and you undo that inverted button. You get rid of that inverted button, and so so when you press the buttons, he actually does the directions that you want him to do. I don't know, maybe that's just me. I know this is kind of like flight controls, where you're pressing down the camera. The nose of the plane is actually going to be going up when down is up, and all that stuff. But Gex is not a plane. He's a lizard man. He's not a plane. He's not a plane. This is not aerodynamic plane man. This is a platformer. Okay? So you don't need to invert the controls here. You don't need to, okay? I would have liked settings to fix that, you know? This is just a little nitpick. Just a little one. Just a little one. Little tiny little nitpick. Now, the levels are much better in this one, except for 2 of them, which we will get to. Most of the levels in Gex 3 I had a lot of fun with. Gex changes his outfit for every level you go to, and every level is a different type of film genre. There's like a western level, there's like a medieval level, there's like a fairy tale level, there's a cartoon level, there's an anime level, there's the bringing back the horror level, there's a mystery noir level. It's all fantastic except for 2 of these levels. The western level is doable, but the level feels unfinished. It's missing a skybox, for one thing. It's completely black. There's no skybox in the western level, which I feel like you should have added a skybox, maybe like a sunset type of skybox, and a little orange, yellowish orange horizon showing the sun going down, or something like that. You needed a skybox. There's no skybox in the western level. That's irritating. And then there's a lot of jumps that you have to make where the platform that you're standing on, they didn't add any color to it. Maybe they were trying to add shadows, but you see, there's no skybox. So it's black out there. So if you don't add color to the ground you're standing on, black, you have no idea if there's ground here. So you're standing here to make a jump here when you need to be here to make your jump to get to here. But you need to color it a little bit better. You need to color. Get some lighting here. The western level just felt like a mess. It did. It was a mess. It was a nightmare, but I finished it. I got all 4 remotes. I got all of the collectibles, and it was... Now, the one that I really want to rant about, though, is the Greece level, the mythology level, the mythology channel, as the game calls it. You go in here, and right away, you realize that Gex's jump is so minuscule, it's so small. The game expects you to make jumps for somebody who has a higher jump, a double jump, if you will. Now, Gex can do a normal jump, and if you press X while Gex is in the air, his tail will go down, and he'll try to do a tail boing spring jump. Now, this spring jump is barely any higher than his normal jump, and this spring jump generally isn't high enough to reach some of these columns that the game expects you to reach. It's almost like he's glitching. He has to glitch up this column because he's normally not high enough to get to this column. But if you glitch the jump and you get just to the edge, he'll get some extra height to get on top of it. And I felt like, you could have just given him a special outfit. Because I mentioned the outfits before. Each outfit, no, not each outfit, but some of the outfits do have perks that other outfits do not. For example, in the Noir Mystery level, Gex can unlock the Dracu-Gex outfit. Now, when you hold down R2 when you're jumping, Gex can glide, fly around, kind of like Spyro, because Spyro 1 had released by the time of Gex 3 coming out, and that's maybe why they tried to do this. And it's a great idea, really. I love the hover controls. The levels where this option is available to you, the anime level, the beanstalk level, those were 2 of my favorite levels in the entire game. They were fantastic. I loved them. And I love the Noir Mystery level for Dracu-Gex. So these 3 were the best levels in the game because that control, that option to have Gex hover, should have been in every single level, honestly. But if you wanted to differentiate Gex's outfits, then maybe for the mythology level, Gex could have had a higher jump or a double jump option, where if you pressed your X button to jump, if you pressed R2, he would do a double jump or something, so he could climb up onto things, and that would have been pretty cool, but the mythology level was just a mess trying to get through a bunch of these jumps because he just could not make the distance. He needed a higher jump. He needed a super jump, and that would have fixed a lot of things. things, in my opinion. That would have fixed so much with Gex's abilities. But every other level was perfectly fine outside of those 2 levels. Everything else was great. I had a lot of fun with it. Now, it does have the same problem that Gex 2 does, where you have to re-enter a level 3 times, at least 3 times, to collect all 3 remotes. The game won't let you get all 3 in one visit. And you could complete a level, you could complete the objectives to unlock the remotes for all 3 objectives in your first visit, but you can only get one of them on that first visit. So you have to come back again and do that second objective to get that second remote. And then you have to come back again to get the third one. I would have thought they would have fixed that by now, where you only have to go in one time and get all 3 remotes in one visit. That would have been perfect. That would have been great, But it is what it is. The best bonus that immediately makes Gex 3 the best Gex 1 is that they finally gave him analog support. Gex finally can move with the analog stick. You have no idea how much better the game has become because of this. Now, if only the camera controls could have been fixed where right will look right, left would look left. If you did that, I would have been able to clear so many obstacle courses, so many platform sections with very little to no issue. But because I was fighting my muscle memory, where I expected right to look right when I'm in the heat of the moment, I have to stop and think that right is actually left each time to change the camera. I had to stop and think, and it messes me up, and it slowed me down so that I couldn't make obstacle courses as fast as I normally would have. But that's just personal things. It's just personal things. That does not make the game worse. It just means it needed more settings. It needed more options to fix the inverted cameras. You fix that, Gex 3 would have been almost perfect. But that Grease level, that Mythology level, definitely needs a higher jump ability to get across things, to get up things. And that Western level needs a skybox. That's all I would have fixed for both of those. Higher jump for Grease and a skybox for the Western channel. And camera controls. If there was a Gex 4 and they gave me camera controls, I would say it's even better than Gex 3. But we never got a Gex 4. That's unfortunate. Maybe it's time to revisit Gex, It's been a while. It really has. It's been a while. Platformers, especially the 3D space platformers, have been around for over 20 years now. We have gotten the controls down perfectly. We've been using analog sticks for over 20 years. I think it's time to finally revisit that, Crystal Dynamics. I think it's really finally time for you to revisit Gex and bring him back into the video game world. Spyro and Crash have done it. It's time for Gex.